I don't know if I need this. Do I need this? Can you hear me at the back? I need it. Okay. So I was a little late arriving today, and I had a quick look in through the door, and the event had started. And I was reminded of a play I was in not so long ago, Marx in Soho. And I was playing Karl Marx, and at the start of the play, Marx walks onto the stage, and he's a little bit uncertain, a little bit diffident. But as the lights go up, he looks out and says, "Thank God, an audience." And that's how I feel today. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening. I hope you've learned something or encountered some ideas that you might not have encountered before. Now, you might have realized that I'm not exactly a local boy. And no, I'm not Australian. It never ceases to amaze me. I've been living in Maryland, or Maryland, as I used to call it, for nearly 16 years. And I'll go into a supermarket, and the young woman behind the checkout will go, "Oh, I love your accent. What part of Australia are you from?" At which point I go very BBC and say, "Actually, I'm from England. And can you tell me where the tomatoes are?" Contrast that with how an Australian would respond if you confused him with an Englishman. "Now, listen here, mate. Do I look like a stuck-up pommy bastard?" So, moved across the Atlantic 16 years ago. Pretty radical change, right? For me and my family. But I think about change a lot. Always have done. It's an important topic. So I'd like to thank the organizers of today's event for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. Luke in particular, who's looking very pale over there because none of what I'm saying right now was in the transcript I gave him when he asked for today's speech. Relax. Feel the force, Luke. I had to say that. Pretty big topic, change. Doesn't get much bigger than survival of the human race, does it? 2,500 years ago, the Greek philosopher Heraclitus famously said, "Change is the only constant." And this is the man who came up with the idea that we cannot walk into the same river twice. Because the water flows on by, right? And the person walking into the river will have changed too with time. Everything is changing. We're sitting here in a room in Stevenson University, Owings Mills, Maryland, in the United States of America, on a planet which is rotating at 1,000 miles an hour. And it's orbiting a star, which we call the sun, at 70,000 miles an hour. And the sun and all the planets in the solar system are themselves whizzing around the galactic core at 450,000 miles per hour. Everything's moving. Even the molecules of the chairs you're sitting on are vibrating right now, exchanging electrons between the atoms, and so on. So that's what it is that you can feel. Fortunately, there are a couple of things we can count on. I like dichotomies. You know those stories about there are two kinds of people in the world. Those who can finish their sentences and... Or there are three kinds of people in the world. Those who can count and those who can't. Or 10 kinds of people in the world. Those who can count in binary and those who can't. Think about it. Actually, my favorite one is there are two kinds of people in the world, those who divide the world into two kinds of people and those who don't. So I'm going to divide change into two kinds of change. External change in the world around us and internal change in ourselves. And I'm going to try and link these two kinds of change, the internal and the external, to Stephen Covey's idea of the circle of concern and the circle of influence. The idea is, right, that the circle of concern is where we can spend a lot of our mental energy and our emotional energy in worrying about things, big, important things, things that nevertheless we have very little opportunity to change. World peace, poverty, famine, wars, refugees. Who will win the World Series? These can all take up our time and energy, and yet we have very little influence upon them. These are just like external changes. In the world around us, the weather changes. I don't know whether you noticed, but it was throwing it down with rain a few minutes ago. Nothing you can do about it. Climate change. It's beyond our power right now to reverse. The ice has already melted. It's already gone. And in our lifetimes, we're not going to see it come back. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not advocating passive acceptance of the way things are. On the contrary, we should all do what we can do as individuals. It's important to reuse, to repurpose, to recycle, to consume less, not more, to reduce our carbon footprints. But the idea that any one of us as an individual can change the forces of nature that are put in motion by the changes in our atmosphere, we can't as individuals. Of course, when it rains, we can carry an umbrella, we can put on a raincoat. If the sun's out, we can put on sunscreen. And don't forget, of course, that there are other ways of looking at the weather. Look at the rain and think about going dancing in it, getting soaked. When it's windy, standing on a high place and feeling the power of the wind. Blow winds and crack your cheeks, to quote Shakespeare. And of course, there are political changes, right? We've seen some of those recently. Political change. I have noticed, however, that Washington, D.C. seems to be the one place on the planet where nothing really changes. So, like the circle of concern, external change is beyond the power of an individual to control. We can no more change these things than King Canute could hold back the tides. Closer to home, of course, there are things that we do feel we have some power to control, some power over, some power to change, like our careers, yes? Where to work and what job to do. What person we're going to fall in love with and spend the rest of our lives with. No, maybe not, eh? There may be people out there who can control those changes, but I've never met one. Certainly not me. Those famous philosophers, Michael Jagger. You see, I graduated many, many years ago, last century, from Cambridge University with a double master's in modern medieval and Oriental languages because I wanted to be James Bond. Well, without the guns. You get the idea. But Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister at the time, and I decided I wasn't going to work for a Conservative government. So then I wanted to be an actor, but I couldn't get any work, and I was poor. So I took a job with a games company, just temporary, just until I got my real career off the ground. Fast forward 15 years, and I get the opportunity to come and work in the United States, just for a couple of years, just for a temporary secondment. And the temporary secondment becomes a permanent position. And then I was made redundant. They let me go. I can't say that without thinking of the face of Gandalf as he falls from the bridge of Khazad-dûm. They let me go. And that, believe me, that was a big change. That was a dramatic change. That was a change that frightened me. I'd worked for this organization for nearly 20 years. I didn't know what else I was going to do. And I'm in a foreign country now. So I decided I was going to turn to personal development, and I was going to become a consultant. You know what they say about consultants, right? People who borrow you a watch and then charge you for telling you what time it is. I turned to personal development, and I tried to put this guy's words into action. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of truth in those words. He said that you are, if you think about it, the average of the 5 people you spend most of your time with. The trouble was, the 5 people I wanted to spend my time with thought I was a stalker and took out restraining orders. I'm making that up, okay. But the real problem was that my circle of influence was very small. It had shrunk to next to nothing because it was all connected with my employment. And when I lost my job, I lost my circle of influence. And I had no idea how to make it grow. I had to change. He's right, isn't he? Your personality is not going to change dramatically from how you are now to how you'll be when you're in your 80s. I think I'll be a bit grumpier, but that's about it. Apart from a serious emotional or physical trauma, my personality will be what it is today. My body will get older and decay even more, and I'll probably get fatter and grayer. But essentially, who I am, I cannot change. We can't change our personality. I mean, it's hard enough just changing our bodies. Losing weight, getting fit, giving up smoking. I've tried all those things. Managed to give up smoking. Was that applause? Please, don't make it sound rehearsed. New Year's resolutions. I became depressed, clinically depressed. I was prescribed antidepressants. And I started going to therapy. And the guy I was going to therapy with suggested I go to a 12-step group, where I came across the addict's prayer. I'm an atheist, but this changed my life. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so that's what I've been trying to do ever since that first encounter with this thing. I've been trying to develop my serenity. I meditate. I try and practice mindfulness. And I remind myself on a daily basis of the need to practice courage. Baby steps. I get courage from the inspiring stories of the people around me. And most recently, from the words of Theodore Roosevelt, which inspired Brené Brown, who you may know from TED Talks, to write a book called Daring Greatly. And if I can remember, the speech goes, "It's not the critics who count, those who point out where the strong stumble, or the doers of deeds could have done them better. No. The credit belongs to those actually in the arena, whose faces are marred with dust and blood and sweat, who strive valiantly, who err. Because there is no effort without error. But who?" Going to look it up now. But who do actually strive to do the deeds, who know great enthusiasms and great devotions, and who, in the end, at the best, finally know the triumph of high achievement, or who, at the worst, if they fail, at least know that they failed while daring greatly. And so their places will never be beside those timid, cold souls who will know neither triumph nor defeat. Thank you very much.